Hi, my name is Chris, and today it's finally time to share my little code snippet that I have basically written and now published for you to enjoy as well to control the ATEM Mini with this control panel right here, which is the Behringer X-Touch Mini. This here is a MIDI control panel, and I've made a couple videos about it in the past. If you want to start using all of the things that I am describing here, it totally would make sense for you to check out especially the prerequisite video to set up all the button layouts and stuff like that. But basically what we have here is an interface where we have 2 × 8 buttons, and then also we have 8 twist knobs, which also have click functionality, so you can press them, and that is a button press as well. Then we have a fader, which is non-motorized. And all of this is available on a second layer as well, so you don't have all of those keys just once, and of course also those twist dials, but you have them twice, and you can program them twice, so you have twice as many features that you could actually make happen here. Now, as you can see, I have already put a little bit of a tape right there to write down what is happening when I am clicking those buttons. For example, I have my secondary camera on this button right here, and the lower one is the version where you will see the picture-in-picture as I have it on screen right now. Now, if I want to get rid of myself in the picture-in-picture, I can just simply click this button up here, and the picture-in-picture is gone, but it is the same camera. Now, why would an interface like this even be necessary? Why not just use the buttons on here? Because what I just showed you, I could also do by just pressing the on and off button on the picture-in-picture mode on the ATEM Mini, essentially. And I can, of course, also switch cameras there as well. However, the ATEM Mini, in my opinion, has one strong flaw, and that is that the buttons that you don't usually use are also not reprogrammable, so you cannot change what these buttons do on the interface, and you're pretty much forced to use all of the things that Blackmagic has thought of or did not think about. And I wanted to have certain functionalities easily accessible, and all of that with a relatively minimal price tag and maybe some fun while programming. Now, a couple things to note before we jump into all of this. The Behringer X-Touch itself, the surface that I am using here, is just a MIDI surface or a MIDI control surface. You can use pretty much any MIDI controller for what I am doing with this project. The next thing is that this specific control surface costs, I think, around 50 euros at the time of the recording, and you might have a different experience depending on where you want to get it. I, of course, will have links to all of the products that I am mentioning throughout this video in the links in the description down below. And if you have any questions around any of these things that are happening here, of course, you can also check out the Discord server, which I now have set up for exactly these types of discussions, and also for announcements whenever there are new versions to, for example, the code about controlling the ATEM Mini with the X-Touch MIDI surface. The next thing that I also want to mention is that, of course, there are solutions out there, for example, to use the StreamDeck XL, or any of those versions with the companion app, which is a open source, or at least it's a free program that you can download. But the main reason why I was intrigued by the X-Touch and getting into that area is because it costs about 50 bucks, and the StreamDeck, even the middle version, costs around 140 euros, which is about 3 times as much as this control surface that I am using here. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that I will not ever buy a StreamDeck, because the feature set of the StreamDeck is pretty significantly different to what we have here available in terms of reprogrammability, which is very easy to do with programs like Companion and even the StreamDeck program itself. And of course, you also have the screens on each and every single button, so it's much easier to have signifying information about what is happening on these buttons, which here it is just the tape that you can use, and then you have them light up depending on what is happening there. And of course, if I now switch to layer B, you still have the same tape there, and with something like the StreamDeck, you would actually have very significantly more information available to you whenever you do switch between different layers, different folders, different feature sets, and such things. So that's definitely lacking from this control surface. On the other hand, however, the control surface like the StreamDeck is lacking any functionality in terms of twist knobs or faders, for example. So that is something that a MIDI control surface like this here features. So for example, for the purpose of changing audio volume or something like that, you might actually prefer using a MIDI control surface like the one that we are using right here. So those are some of the considerations that I think are important to make before jumping into this. I wanted to make this work because it is something that I can afford right now. It is something that gives me the feature set that I was looking for to be able to do, for example, things like change camera and activate the picture-in-picture, which by default the ATEM Mini in itself cannot do. You have to change the camera with one button press, and then you can do the other thing with, for example, activating the picture-in-picture on the device. And of course, you can also automate those things on the software that you have on the computer, but then you have to use that software, and that also does not have keyboard shortcuts or similar things. The other thing is the different styles of picture-in-picture, which in the case of the ATEM Mini, for example, if I switch to the secondary camera and then I activate the picture-in-picture, right now you have a style which I have created inside of the ATEM software. But if I use these buttons that are here, these picture-in-picture buttons are preset to certain modes. So for example, I can click this one, and then we would have something like this. And of course, I can change the position in terms of which corner the whole picture-in-picture should be in. However, it is super tiny, and you can't really change much about that. You can change things like the border and stuff like that. However, I like my picture-in-picture to be different, and it looks mostly like this and also has a border, which I would like to have available at all times. I also wanted to be able to have a picture-in-picture which is widescreen, so that is what I made available like this. And now I have a widescreen version of the secondary camera as a picture-in-picture, and if I click this button again, those actually switch, and in this case we have the computer screen, and at the same time we have a picture-in-picture. Now when I switch between those, you can see we have a switch between the main camera and the computer screen, and I can, however, also change which camera is actually displayed in the picture-in-picture by using the lower end of the button rows right here. So these are set up to actually just change the content of the picture-in-picture, which again is not something that is usually available on the control surface like the ATEM Mini itself, because you can only activate and deactivate the picture-in-picture. You cannot choose what should be shown inside of the picture-in-picture DVE mixer. So those are some of the features that I wanted to have available. But I also wanted to have things like, for example, the ability to change where the picture-in-picture is. And that is something that I actually set up with the position or with this dial right there. So I can actually twist that and choose between certain preset positions essentially. So that's something that I wanted to have there. I also have availability for the size, so I can make this smaller as well as a little bigger, which is not necessarily the most useful. However, it does work quite nicely if I wanted to, for example, put it right there. I can reset these kind of things by just hitting the button itself, and then I can also reset to be in the corner at the lower right-hand side. And lastly, I have the ability to actually change which center I wanted to have in the center, so that I am actually centered right dead on when I am inside of the picture-in-picture. And now if I switch to the main camera and back to the picture-in-picture, I am still dead on center. Even if I put myself a little bit off to the side, I can adjust for that, and now I am there, off to the side, and with the picture-in-picture, it looks like I'm dead on in the center. Resetting that as well. Lastly, I also have functionalities for the volume. So there we have 3 buttons available. I have the master audio, which is one of the microphone ports on the ATEM Mini, which is actually taking the audio from the Zoom F6. And then we also have 2 other ones, which is one, the display audio and the volume of that. And then lastly, I have the phone audio, which is when I use my phone connected via HDMI to the ATEM Mini. And then I can change the audio there. We also have things like, for example, using this auto button, which changes whether or not I want to fade. So now if I do this, I actually have a fade transition. If I disable this button, it essentially is the cut functionality. This, of course, is pretty much the functionality that also the ATEM has by using the cut and auto button. And lastly, I have a fade to black button, which I'm not going to use right now because, of course, that would fade to black. But I have one more button and feature that I want to show you, and that is when I actually have my phone available or my phone on screen or want to bring it onto screen. Then I have this button right there, and if I press that, it actually puts the phone on here with a specific picture-in-picture so that the phone is actually completely visible on screen. This, of course, is mainly useful because I want to be able to, for example, demo an application and do so while I am actually showing everything that we have here, and that needs a specific picture-in-picture style, and I don't want to bother with the software and change things there, run macros and stuff like that. Now, to get back to my usual picture-in-picture, I have to reset all of that and change the content there. So let's change it, for example, to the main camera and make something that makes more sense. This view right here. So this is essentially what is now possible with the ATEM Mini and the X-Touch from Behringer. And now with that, let's jump over to the screen because all of these functionalities are actually available on GitHub as a Node application or Node.js application, which you can download yourself, configure for your needs, and maybe even make adjustments and changes in the code for your needs. And maybe you want to use a different kind of surface, or you have improvements which you would want to see implemented, then you can of course leave an issue or open an issue on the GitHub repository and we can talk about that. Again, I am already foreshadowing that at some point in the future I might change to use a StreamDeck instead of something like this MIDI controller. However, maybe this project MIDI to ATEM, which I have coined it at this point, is also something that will live on in the future depending on the different use cases and people that are actually excited about this kind of project. Now, there also have been other solutions available already, which rely on all kinds of different programs, which is one of those is ATEM to OSC or OSC to ATEM. So that essentially takes OSC messages and then translates those and makes actions available on the ATEM Mini. And then there are programs that can take MIDI and translate those to OSC. However, that was not necessarily a very pleasant experience for me, and for me it is easier to code a program myself that understands MIDI and talks to the ATEM, which is done by a library which is actually Node.js and is completely open sourced. And that is really, really cool. I just want to shout that out real quick. It is a library which is by NRKNO, and that is available in the repository, also on GitHub, and it is linked in my GitHub repository for the MIDI to ATEM. And they actually have a really solid library available to basically understand messages coming from the ATEM Mini and also messages that you can send to the ATEM Mini. Now let's jump over to the screen here. This here is the code that we have for this project, or that I have made for this project. And it is the README file right there. And here you can see which is the development status, what you can do here, how you can install all of this, and what you might have to do to actually make all of this work, how you can use it. And also I am already listing known issues as well as limitations, because there are, of course, a whole bunch of them, because as mentioned at the top right here, this is pretty much a prototype and it works for me, and I have been using it for the past few weeks already. I have made multiple changes and iterations, and now I have at least put it to a point where it is mostly relying on configuration and not actually changing the code. Which means essentially that there's a file which is called config.default.js, which you should probably not necessarily change, but you can change things by copying whatever you want to change over to the config.user.js. Now, making things configurable makes this so that this project might also be able to be used by people that are not programmers or people that understand and use JavaScript. And so this becomes more and more useful for those types of people. Maybe you are one of those. And also it becomes a program that eventually can grow into something bigger by being configurable rather than changing code to actually make actions happen. So for example, if I would have not made these configurable things, you would actually have to change things inside of this code right here, which is all kind of spaghetti mess or something like that. And instead, now, if you, for example, have a different address for your ATEM to connect to, then you can take this part of the configuration, which is the address to connect to the ATEM Mini, put that into the user configuration like so, and change your address right there. So you don't have to change this file at all, and you do all of the changes inside of this own file so that you have your customizations and those are not overwritten when there's a new version released and stuff like that. So let's take a look into the configuration to just give you a bit of a feel of what you can do there and also how this works as I am describing that throughout this process. And it basically just starts from the top right here. You can see we have the two devices that we are working with. We have the MIDI device and then we have the ATEM. Right now, we can only connect to one of these two devices at any given time. So one MIDI controller and one ATEM. This is also maybe something for the future at some point to support multiple MIDI controllers and multiple ATEM controllers. But for now, let's focus on the basics. This is what I have. This is what I am using. So that's what I have implemented. The device name is important because that's how the connection is established. Then we have which channel we should send the output to. This in this case with the Behringer X-Touch and the presets for the layers here I have set to 10. And then we have the address that your ATEM Mini has inside of your local network. That of course you can check with the ATEM setup application. And there you can just simply go onto the settings of your ATEM Mini and there you can find the IP address which is assigned right there. And once you have that, you can copy that over into the code, which is right here. So you can add that there or overwrite it either in this file, better not, and instead do it inside of the config.user. And then going down, we have the milliseconds per frame. This is a setting which should be based on the frame rate that you're using. And this is used for one specific case where there is not really a transition possible because we only have one ME inside of the ATEM Mini. So that's something that is set there. And then we have the input mapping. And there we have basically an index for each of the inputs that we want to be controlling. And in my case, I just called everything cam1 to 8. So those are the inputs. And you'll see that this is actually being reused down the line. Then we have a section which focuses on the transitions. Now the first thing that we have here is the style of the transition, and you can see if undefined, it just takes whatever transition is set up in the ATEM Mini. It also is important to note that this of course only works if you have the auto or cut feature enabled. If I change this, now we are in auto mode, so now we are doing a transition, and it takes the transitions that are set up in the ATEM Mini and chosen by these buttons right here into consideration when it is set to undefined in the style. So if I set this, for example, to one of these wipe features, let's see if I can do any of those with the picture-in-picture. So let's use that one and I remove the picture-in-picture, then that actually wipes away. And if I bring it back, it actually wipes into place. And the same thing is true when I change between between scenes, then all of those things are wiped into position. Now the important thing here is that with the ATEM Mini and only having one ME, if I now change actually to the main camera and at the same time also change the picture-in-picture by doing a switch between those two, then you'll see that that actually will not necessarily work as nicely. So it actually changes the picture-in-picture just like that with a snap, and then it wipes onto the other thing. So that is one of the limitations that we have at the moment, which is the ATEM Mini, and that is not something that's necessarily what I can do about that. So depending on what you have set up in these buttons, if you set the style right there as undefined, then it takes whatever you want on those buttons. Otherwise, you can use the enums. And if you want to change this, you can use the enums, which are available, for example, to make it mix, and then it forces that transition. Then next we have the type, and this basically means that at start, when the program actually is launched, we are set up to cut or auto. So when it is set to auto, then it automatically activates this feature on this button right here. So we have the transitions with the fades. And if you set it to cut, then this actually is not enabled and we just cut between things. And lastly, we have dip when program and DVE change. And that is the functionality that I implemented to basically combat the problem where both of these things change at the same time and we only have one mixer. So if I change the picture-in-picture and also change the background or the main scene at the same time, then it would dip in between to actually make both of the transitions available just like that. And I personally have chosen to right now just do it as if it is just cutting in 2 frames. So if I do a cut, now this here is actually doing a 2-frame cut essentially. So that's what I am going with at the moment, but you can activate this and then it would actually do a dip and then change both of the things at the same time. Next thing, we have the DVE settings, and in this case we have the fill source, which should be started with, and I have set it up to camera 1 at the moment, and this might be a place for an improvement to later on just name these inputs and use the named inputs right there. Then we have the state default, and that is the state of the default picture-in-picture, which right now you can see that is the box that you can see as of right now. And there are all kinds of settings that you can do in terms of which direction the shadow should go. If you want to have a border, which type of settings in terms of hue, saturation, and luma you want to have. All of those things can be configured here, as well as the size and positioning. And those are numbers that you basically take out of ATEM Software Control. However, they're not necessarily the same because there you see them as 4.0. Here you have to put 4000 or minus 4000. So that might be a bit tricky and finicky to dial in, but you'll get the hang of it when you try things around and just test how things go. Then we have different styles, and that is the functionality which I have put onto these buttons right here at the moment. The phone style and the monitor style. So if I put the monitor style, you can see it does multiple things. It changes the camera and at the same time also changes what you see or how the picture-in-picture actually looks. And now if I reset all of those things and bring back the camera into here, then we are back to normal. So that's something that you can do here with the different styles for the different DVE things like the picture-in-picture mainly. And the phone style, I've demonstrated that earlier as well, basically taking up 1/3 of the screen. And then we have the positions, which is the functionality that I have put onto the dials on this. So I can change the position here when I do this, and they actually use the fly key. So they are actually flying between the positions and not just cutting between them. So that's something that is available through the position functionality or this array of different positions and masks. And then next up, we have the assignment of different controllers that feature or which feature should be available on which of these controllers. And those are the functionalities that are actually input as the twisting of the controllers. Now, first in here, we have the node that the MIDI controller provides us with, essentially the number which button or controller is currently activated. And if you've watched the video about the prerequisite of all of the setup here with the layers on the Behringer X-Touch, I have a specific repository on GitHub that you can use for that setup process. Then you should be familiar with how I number things here. Basically, it starts at 0 up here, goes up to 8. And then on the second layer, in this case, it goes from 24 to 31. And the fader right here is actually set up to be the number 126 on layer A and 127 on layer B. And I don't have functionality on the faders because they are not motorized. And so it is kind of unpredictable what happens if you use this. Now I do, however, have actions on the controllers that are available at the top here. And it starts out with the change DVE scale, change DVE position, and mask on the left-hand side. And what's cool here is that I have a couple of features basically implemented here. So first up, you have a default value. And this default value is actually the MIDI value of the controller. So in this case, it's 50, and the button lights that it should turn off when this action is triggered are 12 and 13. Now, if I go back on here, what you can see is when I have this twisty dial here, if I twist that, I want these two buttons to be disengaged. So when I have the DVE mode like this, and I twist this dial, I want this button to light off because it is no longer the correct setup. So that's what is programmed in there as well. And then with the other actions, it is quite similar. You have a default value and you have which buttons should be turned on or off. And now the next action that I use here is the change audio gain, and that actually has a bit more things going on. It has a name, It also has an audio index, it has a channel, default value, and range. Now the range in this case is minus 10,000 to maximum 1,000, which means we're basically going between those levels. And those are basically minus infinity and muted. And then 1,000 is the max that it is available within ATEM Software Control. Then we have the default value, which is in this case 115, and that is the basic number 0 in this case. And if I go 105, that is a little lower than 100% on the volume scale in the ATEM Software Control. The channel is minus 65,280, and there's actually a bit of a documentation here. If you have the stereo split channel, then it is minus 255 for the left and minus 256 for the right channel. Joint channels are minus 6,000 or 65,280. I don't know why those numbers are the way they are, they just are. And then we have the audio index, and in this case, the main microphone input on the ATEM Mini, so the left one, which we have right here. So this audio channel right there has the index 1301, and that's just how those are set up. And the audio index itself on the others, in this case, main display, and that is number 2 because I am using the input number 2 as my main display, and input number 4 is my phone input. Now the reason why we have an action and a name right here is basically because it has the action that is just universally to change the gain. And if I have the change audio gain main as a name as well, then I can have this action multiple times, but distinctly different for the different channels or audio levels for the different purposes, so to speak. So that actually makes it possible that I can reuse the same thing over here, and it actually changes the input light up as well. So those are some of the intricacies of the controllers. Moving on to the buttons, if you look here, we have all of the buttons that we have, and this includes the controllers when you press them. So the button number 0 is actually the controller at the top left here, and that of course is then reset DVE scale, and of course we have changed DVE scale, so it should do something similar. And the button light off, again 1213, that is to get rid of the lighting up of these two buttons so they are no longer engaged and when you press that button. So we have those reset functions over there, and then we have the reset audio gain, and that of course has again basically the same setup as above, and it resets to the default value right there. Then we have the most interesting things, and probably the ones that most people are gonna want to change, and that is the things like change program source, and you also have change DVE style, and cut to black or fade to black, and the auto switch or auto cut switch. Now these are also, some of these have extra functionalities. So let's start with the change program source. Now here we have parameters which are program input and then with upstream keyer or not. Now the program input is cam1 as it is written here, and as you remember we have those mappings all the way at the top right here. So that uses the name right there, and it is the input number 1. So if you want to actually specifically name your inputs, like for example display, second cam or first cam or something like that, then you could change this to main camera or main cam, and it has to be one string, so it has to not have any spaces or minuses or stuff like that. It's easier to just keep it just one string, and that's that. So just make it simple on yourself and do something like cam1. And now that is actually reused down here when you are writing cam1 right there, cam2, cam3, cam4. So that's what those are for, the mappings, because it is kind of tedious to just map things by numbers, and this way I might be able to change things around later on. And the with upstream keyer means whether or not it actually should enable or disable the upstream keyer when you actually hit the button. So for example, if I now hit the button number 8, it changes to the camera, which is my main camera, that is the one that is filming me from straight ahead. And if I hit the button number 8, then that actually becomes the big camera, and it keeps the DVE or upstream keyer enabled. So if I hit this button, we have both of them on the screen at the same time. Now it's a bit of a different story if I go in here into the buttons on the lower row. So buttons 16 to 19 are the first 4 buttons on the lower row. And there I have the first one to only say cam 1. And that automatically sets the with upstream keyer to false or undefined, which is pretty much the same thing. So in this case, you could also write, comma, with upstream keyer false. But what that essentially means is if I click this button, so this button right here, if I hit that by itself, then we are going to switch to just the main cam. So it is disabling the upstream keyer, and it looks like this. Now, I have that available to me because I want to be able to do things like, for example, be able to show just the screen, and that is the button number or the function that is on this button right here. So it's without the upstream keyer. And now if I go on to the button number 10, which is the input number 3, and without the upstream keyer, that's my secondary camera. Now going back to this button right there, which is basically my screen without any upstream keyer. Now if I hit this button here, which is the third on the lower end, then we are ending up with the upstream keyer and without. And if I hit this button right there, which is my Mac display, and with the upstream keyer, and then we have both of those switches at the same time. So that is really, really neat. So you basically have the functionality of changing the main camera or the main source, which is in the program feed, and the upstream keyer enabling at the same time when you press that button. Now the next thing that we have, which is also very interesting, is changing the DVE style. And you can see we have the style that needs to be defined. We have a program input, we have a fill source, and we have button lights and button lights off. Now what is going on here? The style uses the DVE styles, which we previously defined right there. So we have the styles, monitor, and phone. So when we go down here, that's what it uses when it is defining the style. We also have the program input and the fill source. And in this case, the fill source is the fill source for the picture-in-picture, and the program input is whatever should be in the background. And this is really useful because it means that I can change the style of the picture-in-picture and at the same time also change which camera should be as the main shot and which camera should be inside of the picture-in-picture, which essentially makes it possible so that I have just one button right here, and this is this button right there. And so this button essentially changes the main shot to my main camera, the face cam that you see me with. And at the same time, it also changes the style of the picture-in-picture to be the phone one. And it also does change the picture-in-picture fill source to be the phone that I have set up as camera 4. So clicking this button, it immediately changes all of those things at the same time for me, and I don't have to press any other buttons to make this happen. Now I want to reset all of that again and change my view to this and make myself into the smaller corner right there. And we have it back to normal. So the reset on that might be something that is also something I want to be considering in the future. But right now it is actually quite cool because I also have the same thing for the monitor style. And you can see we have the program input as cam 1 and the cam 2 is our fill source. And in this case, that means the main camera would be the main shot as you see it. And the fill source for the picture-in-picture is actually my monitor. And if I press that button, you can see that is exactly what is happening. Fill source, monitor, main camera, myself. But now the interesting thing is when I hit this button, then those two actually switch. But if I hit it now, it also forces those two to be the main camera as the main shot and the picture-in-picture as the monitor. So now if I hit this, we are back at the place where we have the monitor as the big one and myself as the picture-in-picture. Hitting that button again with the feature that we programmed there as the change DVE style monitor, then it is switching between those two. And that can be really interesting because you can make it available that you basically just explain something like this whilst you keep the monitor on screen right there. And then you just click the button again and it switches between the two. So that's something that I really like and that's really cool. Now again, reset so that we have the nice portrait mode DVE style. Then we have the auto cut switch. Of course, that kind of makes sense to switch between auto transition mode and cut mode. So when we have the MIDI controller, now it is in cut mode when the auto is actually not lighting up. If I hit that, now it's lit up and it actually changed to the auto transition mode. So now if I change, for example, to this, then that fades away. I change here, and now I can go back to the monitor, and all of those are fade transitions instead of cut transitions. So that's what is happening there, and this just switches between those two states. Now the next one, fade to black. Of course, you just fade to black. I don't think that I have to basically explain that. It's the same functionality as the one that is on the ATEM Mini button programmed itself as well. Now in the next segment, we just have the change program source again. However, we also have the change upstream keyer fill source functionality. And that is also something that I really like, because this gives me the opportunity to actually change what you see in the DVE or picture-in-picture as the fill source. And you also have available to say when to do that. Now, right now, the only implementation is when auto. So this is actually something that has multiple functionalities at the same time. And I am planning to implement something that is instant, as well as something else that I was planning. But we'll see about that. Now, right now with auto mode, what that means is that if I switch back to how you see it right now. So what we have set up here is 4 buttons. Those are these here. And all of those are set up for the change upstream keyer fill source, because I want to be able to change any of my inputs to be the picture-in-picture. Right now we have the main camera. So this light up is also showing that. Now, what if I want to have, for example, my display, my monitor inside of this little box where I am currently here? Now I can click this button and you can see it already lights up, but it is not actually changing that on the screen. And that is because right now it is just saved for the next transition. So if I now change between any of these buttons, then the picture-in-picture would also change. And I can demonstrate that by going to the screen, for example, or let's go to the main camera. So if I click this main camera button with picture-in-picture, then those two should switch essentially, or show the monitor. Now, however, if I go back to this, you can see we now have the monitor in there, but I don't want that anymore. Let's say I want to have my main camera back in the picture-in-picture. And to do that, I can click this button once. Now, the picture-in-picture is saved for that in the next transition. And if I click the same button again, we actually have that change happening. So this is basically first press, it is storing that information to the fill source for the next transition. Pressing the button again a second time, that actually makes the picture-in-picture show up instantaneously. And if I now click the same button a third time, we actually also switch between what you see in the picture-in-picture and the main source. So 3 times you switch between all of things. Now if I want to go back and switch back, then I can actually go here, because now we have the secondary camera in my case, which is the third input on the picture-in-picture. This is lighting up. If I press that button, they switch again. So that's the functionality of the change upstream keyer fill source, which I have programmed in there. And that is set up with a fill source cam 4 or cam 1, cam 2, and so on, based on the mapping information at the top. And with that, I think we're at layer B, and the only thing that I have changed here is that there is a button which is switch program and upstream keyer fill source. Then we have something different going on here. We have this auto button set up to simply switch between these two. And that's just a very specific functionality that I wanted to have available on this second layer. And the main reason why I wanted to have this as a feature is because I think that the switch between the two is actually something that might be also useful to be just on one button, forced there essentially. So you don't have to search around which of the inputs is currently active as a DVE and press the right one to switch between the two. So you have just one button to switch between the DVE at the moment and the background essentially. And the other things on the second layer here with essentially all of these things that are going on is just that I have things that are sorted differently. In my case, I have the bottom row, like if you look here, I have these buttons right there to be without DVE, and all of these buttons up here show the DVEs for those 4 camera inputs. And on my normal layer A, I have this first button show up the main camera without the DVE. These here, however, show the DVE. So it's a little bit twisted because this is the main way that I want to use this. The main camera should not have anything on it, and all of these three should have something on it. But in a podcast situation, for example, with the layer B, that's what I want to use this for. I just want to have the main cameras on these buttons so I can just simply switch between those and see all of those inputs in the clear and use that like this. And now we are almost through the whole file and we just have the feedback section right here. And this, of course, is for the purpose of making things light up. So we have first the buttons for program input without DVE. That means which of these cameras is currently active and the DVE is not active at the moment. And that, of course, makes it possible, like, for example, we have the DVE active right now. So we have this button light up. And without the DVE, if that is not showing up, then this button up here is lighting up. These buttons are not lighting up based on the fact that this button was pressed. They are actually lighting up based on the information which is provided from the basic mix of the device. So for example, if I now disable the DVE on the ATEM Mini, you can see that the buttons also change as they light up on the ATEM controller or the Behringer controller, so to speak. So that's why this is a specific section and not just bound to the button press. Whichever button you press should light up or stuff like that. It actually is tied to the information on the controller itself or on the ATEM Mini itself. So that's why that is there. And then we have the buttons for program input without DVE, of course. The buttons that should light up depending on when the camera is active. And then we have buttons for active upstream key or fill source. And those are these buttons right here in my case. And they light up depending on which of the cameras is currently set up to be in the fill source. So right now you can see myself. So the button for the main camera is this one in the fill source. Now if I were to put, for example, the desktop or the code that we have here inside of the fill source by pressing twice on this button, as you remember, then this is lighting up because it currently shows the display inside of the DVE. So going back to the main camera, this is lighting up. Again, same thing here. This is actually on basis of which are set up inside of the ATEM Mini and not just which button was pressed at what time or stuff like that. So these are mapped like that. And with that, we actually have a full walkthrough of the configuration file for this. And I hope this guide helps you set up your Behringer X-Touch Mini or whatever MIDI controller you use with your ATEM Mini. I hope this will work with other ATEM Minis. Right now, I only have the ATEM Mini available, and I hope that it works with the Extreme and Pro ISO and so on. But as I have stated in this file right here, which is the README file, the known issues are that this is currently only compatible with my device because I cannot test anything else. So I have not done anything with multiple mix effects. I have not done anything with multiple upstream keyers. And of course also not with the recording or the streaming capabilities because those are also not things that I have available on the ATEM Mini. And of course SuperSource is also lacking because I have not done anything with it and I cannot do anything with it unless I get the ATEM Mini Extreme or Extreme ISO, which I would love to, but right now that's just not a possibility as of right now. If you want to support the further development of this project, you can go to chrisspiegel.com/donate and send any kind of cryptocurrencies or PayPal donations or contact me directly either through the Discord server or through my website with my email address. That's of course always a possibility. If you have any questions around this with the development, starting this package up, trying to make it work, if you have problems with it, please let me know either on the Discord server or in the issues section of the GitHub repository, which will be linked in the description down below. If you want to get yourself a Behringer X-Touch Mini to control your ATEM Mini, or you want to get yourself an ATEM Mini or Extreme or whatever, then please use any of the links in the description because those are affiliate links, don't cost you any extra money, but they help me potentially at some point upgrade to the Extreme ISO and of course also make more videos like this and also add to this program and make it more durable, more user-friendly, and have a future development plan here to eventually, maybe even, as I have written here, have a fully configurable file there, have multiple things available, talking with other programs potentially in the future, and just basically translating between ATEM and other software devices. Maybe this can become the companion of MIDI controllers. Who knows? We'll see. And yeah, with all of that said, I hope this video was interesting or helpful for you. If it was, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Share it with a friend that might be interested in this type of setup. And of course, contact me on my website, in the Discord server, or in the comment section. And I hope to see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.